everyone. Welcome into our second live episode of Arizona Crime Uncovered. Today, we are talking about the verdict in the Lori Daybell murder conspiracy trial here in Arizona. So many people watching yesterday as a jury found her guilty. Her first charge here in Arizona that she has been found guilty of. We have a panel of experts, as you can see, that are going to break down this verdict and also talk about Lori Daybell's first trial that we just saw play out here in Arizona. But before we bring them in, we want to remind you about this case. So Lori Vallow Daybell has now been convicted of planning the murder of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, with the help of her now late brother, Alex Cox. And there's so many names involved in Lori Vallow Daybell's whole entire tragic and twisted story. So we're going to make sure to take you each step of the way through this. Now, after about 3 hours of deliberation, really the jury got the case the first day, only had it for about 15 minutes, took a break, came back the next day. So about 3 hours total of deliberation. We heard that guilty verdict almost exactly 24 hours ago. So let's bring in our panelists. We have Ben Taylor, who is a local Valley attorney here in Arizona, and he has been closely watching this case, helping provide legal perspective for us and others, and we so appreciate him being here. We also have Tom Evans, who was an alternate juror for Daybell's Idaho case. So he's going to weigh in, kind of giving us that perspective. And then we have special prosecutor Rachel Smith, who was brought in to help with Daybell's case in Idaho, secured convictions there. So she is here to also weigh in. And we want to start with you first, Rachel, because we haven't gotten to talk to you since we heard that verdict. What is your reaction and what were you thinking when you heard guilty again for Lori Daybell?
When I heard guilty again for Lori Vallow Daybell, I was relieved and excited for Charles's family. It's been nearly 6 years in the making. They've had to wait so long to hear some measure of justice for Charles. I also was relieved for Brandon Boudreaux and his family because it's a very clear statement to Lori that a jury will see her role in planning, leading, and conspiring for both multiple people's deaths. So it's relief and excitement and gratitude that that jury saw through and gave the victim some measure of justice.
I was talking to both Tom and Ben yesterday, texting you both as we were kind of camped out inside the courthouse, waiting for these deliberations to come to a close. Tom, you actually traveled from Idaho here to Arizona to watch part of this trial as well. What was it like for you? I know you didn't get to be involved in the deliberations in Idaho. What was it like for you, though, to watch this all play out and hear that verdict as well?
It was kind of nerve-wracking watching the trial. There was a lot of evidence that I'm aware of that didn't get brought in, and that was frustrating. But I understand that the prosecutor, Trina Kay, knew what she was doing. She had a plan, and it worked. So it was good to see it came out the right way.
And Ben, I know when we were talking, you were saying, you thought that it might happen quickly. I think it did happen still somewhat quickly, but were you surprised that it still took about 3 hours for this to all play out?
It's a murder case, and in murder cases, it does take time for them to go through all of the evidence. I even thought that they might just take the vote that same day when they first got the case and just raise their hand and say, how many people here? All 12 of them will say guilty, but it sounds like they did, discuss some things. It took them a couple hours, a lot of evidence, and they came to the decision of guilty. So wasn't too surprised. I think everybody was expecting a verdict yesterday, Tuesday afternoon, which came, early Tuesday afternoon.
Well, we have some sound from Kay Woodcock, Charles Vallow's sister, and also Charles Vallow's other siblings as well. We want to get to that, so I want to play that sound for you now.
Years of walking the pits of hell every day, and about halfway through I realized, okay, I'm gonna make it through, but it was a long time.
Elation.
it was a long time before I got to that point. And the order in which it's happened, you know, this was the first incident, the first murder, and then everything up in Idaho, and then so Charles would have wanted, you know, take care of Tammy and the kids first, and get to me when they're ready. And so he would have been. He's fine, and I know that he's pleased with us.
Okay, I'm wondering if there's anything you'd say to Lori at this point.
We got you, and you're not the smartest person in the room, and now it's time for you just to hide away. And well, after Brandon's trial, but you can just hide away, and everybody's going to forget about you. We'll be on our way through our life, and she'll be rotting in prison where she deserves to be.
Like Charles always used to say, love always wins.
Yeah,
So.
and oh yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, love always wins was Charles's thing, and yeah, so it does.
Rachel, we heard from the family as well that they've gotten support from Idaho. They've also gotten support here in Arizona. They described the moment of hugging Trina Kay, the prosecutor in this case. It was Charles Vallow's brother who actually said, I told her I loved her and thank you so much. As someone who prosecuted Daybell's Idaho case, what is that feeling like of turning to the family and getting a conviction?
It's relief, it's gratitude, it's humbling. That feeling of waiting on that verdict is one of the worst things you can go through, because in your head you're terrified you've let them down, you're terrified you failed, you think of all the things you should have done. And so in a span of like a minute, you go from did I miss something, did I mess it up, to oh thank God. So it's such a relief to be able to give them some some measure of accountability.
Tom, we're going to hear from the jurors here in a second, but many of them, came out of court, and we were the ones who were telling them that some of the missing puzzle pieces that they didn't have. You talked about the evidence that you knew about. How much has this impacted not only your life, these cases, but also the Idaho community? Because I think you can speak really well to that as well.
It has affected the community in just an amazing way, and positively in a lot of ways, because so many people came together in support of the family and worked so hard for this. And the police and the prosecution, everybody in Idaho did such a good job, really dedicated to this. So that was really good to see.
In terms of what we saw after that verdict was read, we saw Daybell, who stipulated to 3 aggravating factors. And usually this is decided by a jury. We were prepared to hear more testimony. Prosecution had witnesses that they were planning to call. Ben, how rare is it that someone does this, and kind of explain what she did there?
Basically, she's letting the judge and the prosecutor know that you can give her the maximum amount of sentence. The reason why you have what you call an aggravator's trial is that the prosecutor wants to get the maximum amount of sentence. So you go in front of the jury. Lori Daybell could have stood up and said why she deserves a lower amount, but because she stipulated to that, she's pretty much waving the white flag and saying, I give up. Go ahead and give me the maximum amount of sentences. So it's very rare you don't see that. And that's where it goes back to her representing herself. As an attorney, I would never do that with my client. There's no legal strategy that would allow you to do that. That's smart. So it's a very not the most smart legal decision that she did, but it sounds like she was giving up, and she was just tired. So who knows why she did that, but that's something you never do, is waive the aggravators, because now you're telling the judge, please aggravate me. I did what I did, pretty much.
Yeah. Ben, how could this impact her other trial that we're about to talk about here in just a few minutes? How could that impact that case? Can it be used against her?
And that'll be up to the judge to decide what from this trial can be used against her in the coming up trial. All the witnesses testified on the record, so that's live testimony. That's a transcript that you can use in the new trial, but it'll be up to the judge to decide what evidence can be used in the old trial, even in Idaho. What evidence can be used in Idaho? All the trials some of the stuff can be used, but sometimes the judge will preclude it just to make sure that she has a fair trial and the facts are based upon that case and that case only.
Before we move on to that next trial, we want to play some of the juror sound that we got yesterday, hear from those jurors who walked out, obviously, the verdict guilty, but they talked about some of those missing pieces, including that Lori Daybell had been convicted of killing her 2 kids in Idaho. So let's take a listen.
There's a lot of backstory here, and this woman had already been convicted of 3 homicides, and they obviously didn't want you folks to know that. Nobody knew that during your deliberations. No. Is that correct?
Correct.
Wow.
What was this experience like for you?
It was sad, as he said. For me, it was the text messages that did it, as far as evidence. And I feel like we uncovered some lies.
I think probably 10 out of 12 of us were certain. The other 2, we helped them go back to what they needed to learn to kind of make up their mind. And then, we just kind of went from there.
To learn now that everyone that was in that house that day, minus Daybell, is all not with us anymore, is dead or has been killed. I mean, what is that like to hear as jurors walking out?
Sad. I kept wanting to hear from Tylee.
And Tom, these jurors are going to piece through this information. They told us that they were going to go home and do research because they were now hearing about Lori Vallow Daybell. What do you think that process is going to be like? You were someone that, really had to see this in full display as an alternate juror in Idaho.
Yeah, I know for myself, when I got done, I really got into researching and I had so many questions that I needed answers to. And I really empathize with these jurors, having been one myself. I'm glad that the verdict came out the way it did, because if they had acquitted for some reason and then found out after the fact what her crimes were later, that would have been really hard on them.
Yeah. To think about all of this, the missing pieces that they had, and to still secure a guilty verdict. Ben, we heard from one juror who said that honestly, it was closing arguments that did it for him, that he was on the fence until closing arguments. What does that have to say about closing arguments and how important they are in a case?
Yes, I mean, closing arguments is the last statement that the jurors hear. And that's the thing about a trial. Throughout the trial, you have no idea whether or not they're going to vote for you or against you, so guilty or not guilty. But to hear that juror say that they're on the fence, that tells you that the prosecution has a high burden to prove. And if that one juror would have stuck it out and been strong, instead of talking about a guilty verdict today, we would have been talking about a hung jury today, meaning that we would have to do this whole trial all over again. So closing arguments are so powerful because that's the last words those jurors hear before they go back into the jury room to deliberate the case.
And we want to get to something that happened in the last few hours. The Maricopa County Attorney, Rachel Mitchell, she actually had a press conference, commented not only on the verdict, but also someone asked, why is this important? And it's a question that we have gotten before. So she's going to talk about that, and she is also going to address the case. Take a listen.
One of the things two things I would point out. One is, as you know, sentencing is not completed in that case, number one. Number two, there's another trial that will follow behind in a couple of months. So I don't want to talk too much about it. But what I would say is this. Having watched portions of the trial and been briefed on it daily, I am extremely proud of the way that the prosecutor, Trina Kay, conducted herself and the efforts of the team that she led to get the conviction and get justice for the family. We don't keep billable hours like a law firm does. We're, salaried employees. And So, cost is not something that I can just give you a number to a case. But what I would say is this. If it was your loved one who was killed, would you be okay with Rachel Mitchell saying, somebody else got her for something else, so we're just going to ignore that?
Yeah. And Rachel, this is something that we have talked about. Talk about how important it is to have these trials here in Arizona.
All I can say is amen, Rachel Mitchell. There is a lot of pressure on prosecutors' offices to cut back and think about judicial efficiency and economy. And while I respect that and honor that, in certain types of cases, but when you have a victim who has waited for justice, who has not been heard on a case like this, with somebody who has harmed number of people exponentially, to give that person their day in court is extremely important. Every victim matters. Every victim deserves their day in court, and kudos to Maricopa for following through.
Yeah. So let's talk about the next trial, because we still have another one. Brandon Boudreaux is at the center of that trial, that case. He is a victim who survived in this case, and it's another conspiracy case as well. Brandon Boudreaux, we want to break down that for everyone. Daybell had a niece, and Brandon Boudreaux is that niece's ex-husband. So he was there in court yesterday as the verdict was read, and his trial is upcoming. Ben, I want to ask you first, do you think we're going to see Daybell represent herself again, despite this conviction that we just saw?
She would be smart to ask for an attorney to represent her. I think she would do a lot better in this upcoming trial if she had an attorney. However, Lori Daybell does what Lori Daybell wants to do. And she said that she wants a speedy trial. So she might feel like her attorney might be holding the case up. So she might want to represent herself. So my prediction is that she's going to represent herself in his next trial. And I think we all know, based on the facts of this next trial, she might be found guilty again.
And we saw this trial go so much faster than it was scheduled for. It was scheduled for 4 to 6 weeks. Rachel, when you know this case so well, do you think we're going to see some new evidence come out during this trial as we look close at this case now?
There's no question you will see additional evidence, because the facts and circumstances surrounding the shooting and the conspiracy for Brandon to die are different than the other crimes. One of the reasons Idaho took so long is we had so many crimes, and each crime has its own story, its own truth that must be told. And so Brandon, the truth around what happened to Brandon needs to be told, and we'll have additional evidence that we didn't need in Idaho. We were allowed to admit some of it to show the conspiracy and the motive and the plan between the three parties. So we have some of the information related to Brandon, but not all that's out there. We didn't try to put in everything involving the shooting and conspiracy to kill Brandon. That's Arizona's job, and we will see that out of Trina Kay and the team in Maricopa.
Yeah. Someone just asking a viewer, Tim Mitchell, how Lori Daybell's brother died, and that would be Alex Cox. He died of apparent natural causes just a few months after all of this in 2019. So for those of you that are confused, I know there's so many names to this. Before we wrap up just breaking down this verdict, I do want to ask you, Rachel, we saw this successful conviction here. Do you think that prosecutor Trina Kay will change anything about her strategy? We heard from Rachel Mitchell today. Each case is unique. So as a special prosecutor, what do you think will happen there?
Trina Kay clearly is a very traditional, very conservative, very concise prosecutor. You don't change who you are. While the case is not about the prosecutor, and it should never be about who the prosecutor or the judge or the jury is, it should be about the facts. So that piece won't change. We will see a very concise, very organized, very streamlined trial. It'll be very focused on Brandon. It'll be admitting the evidence needed to let the jury find the truth in this situation. But I don't think we'll see much effort to go beyond that, because it's very clear they're going to try it very cleanly, very conservatively.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for joining
Thank
us to
you.
break down this verdict. As we were saying before, there is so much to talk about, and we're going to continue to cover this here at ABC 15 as we look ahead to the next trial. All of those things supposed to start at the end of May, beginning of June. So we will continue to cover it here, right here on ABC 15. Thank you again to our panelists, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Ashley.
you.